Week 1 is here, and while your draft will provide the core of your fantasy rosters, it's vital to constantly improve your team, taking advantage of good matchups and future opportunities. Every week, I'll be answering two simple questions. Who should I stream this week, and who should I stash for the future? Find out on the Fantasy First Down. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. We're starting our week 1 content, and we're starting it off, as we will many weeks, with streamers and stashes. That's right. I'm going to tell you the guys that you should specifically be starting this week that you wouldn't be otherwise, and guys you should be sticking on your bench because they're going to be league winners later on in the season. If you haven't already, it'll be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. You can check us out on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. I answer all of your questions over there. Great for start sit. You can also check us out on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. My rankings are at ffdfantasyfootball.com. And you can also check out my articles over at football.rasball.com. But today we are talking about streamers and stashes. So let's get straight into it. So it's going to be formatted roughly like this. Okay, every time I'll take you through a couple of streamers, a couple of stashes at each position. If you got questions, stick them below in the comments. So let's get into the QB streamers and a couple of guys who have really good matchups this week and are available in a lot of leagues. If you're starting someone like, I don't know, a Jaden Daniels potentially, you might be wanting to ease off him and go for one of these guys instead, because Daniels ultimately is a rookie and we don't really know what he's going to look like in his first week. It would be a good idea to have another option there that might be a little bit safer and has a little bit more upside. Baker Mayfield was a shock top 10 quarterback last season, and he gets a fantastic matchup against the best QB matchup in the league, certainly the weakest secondary, and one of the better run defenses in the Commanders. This is a fantastic opportunity for him to get off the board early, and I do feel like he's going to provide you a good solid base of around 25 to 30 points. That's a lot more than you're going to get from a lot of your starting quarterbacks. He's a really solid option. As is Jared Goff, who takes on the Rams, and the Rams were pretty darn weak against quarterbacks last season. Jared Goff has had consecutive top 10 quarterback seasons for fantasy, which is kind of crazy to think about, especially given how much he copped when he got traded across to Detroit from the Rams. Now he gets to take them on in week 1, having gotten really close to a Super Bowl last season as well. He's another fantastic matchup. If you've got one of those riskier quarterback plays like a Jaden Daniels, then this is another very good option that could be available on waivers, especially in the shallower league. Now, if you're not looking for a guy to start this week, but you just want someone to stick on your bench because you're not really sure about your starters, and realistically, unless you've got one of the top 8 or 9 quarterbacks, you probably should have a second quarterback on your bench, and if you don't need one. So my favorite quarterback stash, and it's been this way all off-season, is Kirk Cousins. I think this Falcons offense is going to be very good. We've seen Cousins be a top 12 quarterback for top 13 for 8 consecutive seasons before his injury last season. I see no reason that won't continue with the Falcons. They've put in place a really strong offense. Bijan Robinson's a very good receiving back. You're going to have Drake London, who's going to operate effectively. You can have Kyle Pitts, who's one of the best tight ends around, especially as a receiver. Plus, Darnell Mooney's very underrated, and I really also like Ray McLeod as well. One of those guys might pop up later on. So I really like Cousins as a stash, and I think it's also worthwhile stashing Caleb Williams as well. Definitely wouldn't start him yet, and he is going to be taken in a lot of leagues. So this is more of a reminder to not start him this week, but he definitely is someone worth putting on your bench because he could be really good. I just think that it's very risky starting a rookie in week 1. Probably wouldn't be starting Jaden Daniels or any of the other rookie quarterbacks either. Now, with our running backs, few streaming options for you, and some of these are pretty deep streamers, but Javonte Williams will certainly be on roster somewhere. If you've got him on your roster, I'm probably starting him against the Seahawks. The Seahawks conceded the most touchdowns to running back last season. That's from Jeff Kaiser. And also the touchdown tool on the Rasball website. Definitely worth checking that out. They also conceded the second most rushing yards and the third most fantasy points to running back. So, look, this is a great matchup for Williams, assuming that something crazy hasn't changed in Seattle, and I don't think it has. For that reason, I'd be happy to start Javonte Williams. I also think they're going to have to run the ball a lot because they don't have Russell Wilson there. They now have a new rookie quarterback in Bo Nix, and I feel like they might not want him throwing the ball too much in week one. So I think we see a lot of Williams. And I think we also probably see a lot of Jaleel McLaughlin. Samaje Perine's gone. McLaughlin's probably the receiving back. Could see quite a few check downs as well from Bo Nix. So Javonte Williams is a good starting option. I think Jaleel McLaughlin is a guy that you can start if you're a little bit desperate. Speaking of other desperation options, these two guys are guys that you really should only be streaming if you've gone zero QB, you've had massive issues with injuries, or you are hoping for some reason that Jonathan Brooks is going to be the option. Maybe you're in a dynasty league. Realistically, that's the only situation where you're starting these guys. But I do think Ty Chandler could be a good option. He's one of my favorite handcuffs, but I do think this week he gets a good matchup against the Giants. And I do think that a lot of people are sleeping on just how involved he's going to be. I think it's going to be a lot closer to a committee than Aaron Jones doing everything. I also think both of these guys are going to be involved, and both are going to be very good, especially in week one. And Samaje Perine has gone to the Chiefs. They've put Clyde Edwards-Helaire on IR, which is very sad. He's having PTSD symptoms. Perine probably goes in at the backup, although it could be Carson Steele, who originally they had as a fullback, bizarrely. I think it's probably Perine that's the key backup. He's certainly going to do a lot of the receiving work. That could really hurt Isaiah Pacheco, depending on how they use him. I do think it's possible that he moves into the Jerick McKinnon role that we've seen be very valuable in the past. And I think Baltimore is the kind of team where you could see more checkdowns than you expect. So if you're really desperate, Perine is an option as a streamer. He's also a stash option in a PPR league if you're in a deep league and you need someone who could well be an option on a weekly basis as a receiving running back. Now, with stashes, there's heaps of good stashes around. If you go to the streamers and stashes article on the Razzball website, you will see that I've listed a whole lot of running back stashes because there's so many good handcuffs, but my favorite is Rico Dowdle. I think he'll struggle a little bit against the Browns, but it wouldn't surprise me if in a few weeks he's taken over that Tony Pollard style role of being the more valuable of the Cowboys running back, especially because Zeke's now 2 years older. We didn't really see it coming that way when Pollard really took over. It wouldn't surprise me this time if Dowdle takes over that spot. Last year, my favorite stash in week one was Jalen Warren, and that worked out really well. I see the same thing happening here with Rico Dowdle. Blake Corum is also a very, very good option. A lot of people have been in my DMs and in my comments not happy about my Blake Corum takes, saying, well, what about Ronnie Rivers? Well, what about Ronnie Rivers? If they liked Ronnie Rivers, they would have used him last season instead of having Kyren Williams out there on like 100% of the snaps. If they liked Ronnie Rivers, they wouldn't have brought Blake Corum in a third-round pick. They don't like Ronnie Rivers. It's going to be Blake Corum as the key backup. He's probably going to be a little bit more involved than most people would prefer. And if Kyren Williams goes down, all of a sudden, Blake Corum is an absolute league winner. Another league winner, if the starter goes down, is Ray Davis. I really like his chances of getting an every down role, replacing James Cook if there is an injury to James Cook. Now, James Cook isn't a particularly injury-prone running back, but he's a running back. Running backs on average, just on average, will miss 2 games each season. That's starting running backs. Realistically, over half of the running backs in the league will miss games this season, meaning there's a good chance you're going to get something out of Corum and Davis, and that's why you stick them on your bench rather than trying to fight everyone over them with the waiver wire. Wide receivers, and Jakobi Meyers is my favorite of these guys. In shallower leagues, he's going to be available, but in deeper leagues, he's probably on your bench. I think he's a solid starter this season. Well, maybe not the whole season, but certainly in week one, especially in PPR. He's going to be in the slot. We know that the Chargers secondary is a little bit weak. You can throw on them. So I do expect that we do see a surprising amount of Jakobi Meyers in week one. Gardner Minshew is technically an upgrade, and he was the wide receiver 28 or something like that last season, Jakobi Meyers. Admittedly, he did cool off towards the end of last season, and Devontae Adams had some injury issues, which meant Meyers was more involved. But I still think Meyers is a guy that you can start in week one if you really need somebody because you've got injuries to your starting wide receivers. Or potentially because you've got someone like a Jamar Chase or a CeeDee Lamb, you're not sure that they're going to start in week one. This is a good backup option as well. Ray McLeod is my favorite guy that's available on waivers. I've got him in a lot of deeper leagues. I feel like he's a really good PPR option. I talked earlier about how I do think the Falcons are going to be very good, and I do think they're probably going to use Darnell Mooney and Ray McLeod, or at least one of those two. So I would like to have McLeod in my team, and I would happily start him this week in a deep league if I'm desperate, because I do think there is that possibility of like 7 or 8 targets, even if they're not particularly valuable targets. Wan'Dale Robinson falls into that same category. Unlike the Rams, though, unlike the Rams system, which the Falcons are using, where they use a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, I think we're going to see a lot more 2 tight end sets, and that is going to hurt Robinson over the course of the season. But I feel like in week 1, where Malik Nabers is making his debut and things aren't really settled, I do think we could see enough Robinson to make him valuable. I feel like he's a good, deep streaming option that a lot of people haven't thought about if you're really desperate. But realistically, you're probably not playing McLeod or Robinson unless you're super desperate. Your normal starters are better options here. I think Myers is the only guy I'd start over guys that would be considered normal starters. The stashes are certainly more useful. And I mean, Dontavian Wicks is going to be gone in a lot of the deeper leagues. And I think that's kind of dumb. He was going way too early in drafts. He's significantly more valuable in shallow leagues. For me, if you're in a shallow league, you should be more attracted to someone like a Wicks than in a deep league where he realistically needs an injury to be valuable. But if he gets an injury, he could become very valuable. That's the sort of player that you want. It's kind of like a handcuff for running backs. He's one of the few wide receiver handcuffs. So I do think he's a solid stash if you're in a deeper league. And I feel like against Philly, realistically, he could also be a viable deep streaming option this week as well, because Philly last season had the worst wide receiver defense against fantasy. Mac Hollins is a guy that nobody's talking about. I do think he's going to be the starting second outside wide receiver opposite Keon Coleman. We don't really know what that depth chart's going to look like. Curtis Samuel is still battling injuries. When he comes back, he probably battles Khalil Shakir for that kind of like smaller guy role. I think they do want the 2 big guys on the outside. They want Coleman and they want Hollins. You do have to worry about 2 tight end sets, and that could impact Hollins, but he's someone you can stick on your bench and to see what happens. It wouldn't surprise me if he plays the majority of snaps. And Greg Dortch is the 3rd wide receiver in Arizona. And we've seen when he's played, he's actually been pretty valuable. He gets a lot of targets and he can be quite effective with them. It's kind of surprising he doesn't get more opportunities to start. He's playing at Buffalo, which isn't a great situation. You don't really want to be starting him this week, but he's someone you can stash on your bench and just see how he's used and what his snap count is like. With the tight ends, and this is my favorite streamer of the week by a mile, love Taysom Hill against Carolina. They're a really easy team to run on, and we know that the Saints are going to want to run the ball. It's going to be quite a bit of Alvin Kamara, but I think we'll see a heap of Taysom Hill, especially in the red zone. I feel like he's going to be really involved this season. He's going to be fantastic in week 1. So I would happily start Taysom Hill over anyone that's not a top 11 tight end. I'd be starting him over Dallas Goedert. I'd be starting him over Dalton Schultz. I'd be starting him over all of those lower tight ends as well. And I'd probably start him over Brock Bowers because you just don't know what that offense is going to look like in week 1. And I think it goes without saying, that's not Geno Smith, that's Noah Fant. I'm sorry, when I was looking at what the matchups were, I was looking at the quarterback page, and my brain's obviously read Geno Smith. So Noah Fant obviously is my favorite tight end streamer. That's not Taysom Hill, obviously, and certainly my favorite PPR tight end streamer. I think Taysom Hill's probably more valuable in a half PPR or a non-PPR. Even in PPR, he's still an option, but Noah Fant has a great matchup against Denver, who's been very susceptible to tight ends, especially last season. They were the weakest tight end matchup, but even the season before, they were weak as well. It just seems to be how teams can attack him. Noah Fant's been the top 18 tight end for 4 of his first 5 seasons. Then he really fell off last season because of his usage. They've got a new OC in. They don't have Colby Parkinson. They don't have Will Disley. It's just going to be a whole heap of Noah Fant. You'll see a little bit of AJ Barner as a blocker, the rookie, and you'll see some Pharaoh Brown as the second guy in, but Noah Fant is the starter, and I feel like he's going to be a real sleeper this season. So I like him as someone that you can stream this week if you do need a starting tight end. Stash-wise, Hunter Henry. I don't know how this offense is going to work. It's entirely possible they barely use the tight ends, or it's possible that Hunter Henry is the number 1 option. Because we don't have that assurity yet, for that reason, he's more of a stash for me, but realistically, he is a viable starting option around that same area as Noah Fant as well. So I do like Hunter Henry this week, but I like him more as a stash for the season. If you don't have one of the top 10 or 11 tight ends, Henry's a guy you want to get onto your bench. And a much deeper stash option is Colby Parkinson. We've seen Tyler Higbee have some pretty darn good seasons, but he has aged out a little bit, and obviously he's going to be injured for much of this season. For that reason, I think Parkinson is a solid pickup just to see how he gets used and to see whether they're using their tight end as kind of like their 3rd receiving option, as opposed to using Demarcus Robinson or Tutu Atwell. Kickers, and this is where you really should be streaming. If you're not streaming kickers and DSTs, firstly, you didn't pay attention to my kicker and DST video where I went through and I explained basically why you absolutely should be doing this. If you streamed kickers just using the streamers I put in my Razzball articles last season, you would have had the 3rd highest scoring kicker in the league. Very simple. And they're always available on waivers. I ended up picking Brandon Aubrey and Jake Moody as streamers at some point in the season. So you could have just taken them, of course, as well. But realistically, you've got to be streaming, and you should be streaming these guys. Cairo Santos gets a fantastic matchup, the best matchup in the league against Tennessee. And he was the kicker 6 last season, but he's available in the vast majority of leagues. Available in less leagues is Kaimi Fairbairn, but this is still a fantastic matchup. There's heaps of other good kicking streaming options as well. If these guys aren't available in your leagues, just hit me up. Happy to look at who is available and give you the best option. As for DSTs, Vikings DST against the Giants. The Giants were awful last season. Great DST matchup. I do think the Vikings are very underrated. They've brought in Jonathan Grenard. They've got Andrew Van Ginkel. And they've also able to cycle in the rookie Jared Verse. So I do feel like they've got a lot of different options, and they're going to be, Dallas Turner, not Jared Verse. And I think they're going to be very effective this season. But potentially a better streaming option is whoever is playing against the Patriots. I think the Patriots are going to be a real gold mine for DSTs. I think they're going to really struggle to score points, and they're going to turn it over quite a lot. For that reason, Bengals playing the Patriots, totally valid option. Arguably a weaker DST. They were DST 20 last season. Really, most of their production comes from Trey Hendrickson, who will hopefully be playing week 1, and a little bit of Sam Hubbard. They go okay with BJ Hill up the middle as well, but realistically, they don't really have a lot of dangerous guys that can produce, but this is a fantastic matchup, and you've got to play the matchups with DSTs. That's why you don't take them early. Just stream them every week. Super easy. Take one of these 2 guys. They will be available in your league, and go and win your league, or at least go and win that week 1 matchup. If you've got any questions, of course, make sure you hit me up wherever you can find me, either on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down, Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Check out my rankings at ffdfantasyfootball.com. YouTube, obviously here. Chuck it in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe. And of course, my articles are at football.rasball.com. I've got an article on streamers and stashes coming out in the next day or so. Plus, later on in the week, I'll also be talking about my slot versus wide analysis using some of the awesome tools that they have on the Rasball website. I recommend you go and check those out as well. I'll be back in the next day or 2 with more fantasy football content. Good luck for the start of your season. I hope you enjoy it. I hope your drafts have gone well. And always hit me up if you've got any questions. I will see you next time.